Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another live episode of The Breakdown. It is May the 4th, 2025. I have my special little Millennium Falcon. 'Twas a gift. It's a special. It lives on my little desk here, and that's about as Star Wars-y as this episode is going to get because we have so much to cover tonight. It's a little bonkers. Oh, it's going to be a long one. Strap yourselves in, folks, because this is a monster episode. Because there's been a little bit that's gone on in Alberta politics. Before we get too far into the things, I want to say a big thank you at the beginning of the show to everybody who's tuning in live, who's getting involved in the chat. Hey, everybody. Yeah, let's just get right into it because we've got everybody is going to hate me by the time that we're done tonight's show. To start with, let's start by talking about coal mines again more because it's still a problem. It's an ongoing issue in the province of Alberta, and we're going to continue to talk about it until it stops going away. Now, in order to set the stage for the story that we're going to talk about, because the Tyee dropped quite a little story this week. In order to set stage for it, though, we got to play a couple clips. Got to go down memory lane. You've heard these before. You'll hear them again because they are incredibly relevant. So let's go back just a few months to the commitments that were made on coal mining by Brian Jean and Rebecca Schultz.
How will this affect the Grassy Mine proposal?
Well, the Grassy mine proposal, of course, was an exempt mine going forward, but there are absolutely no exceptions in relation to selenium and the effect and the long ongoing scenario of selenium. And the AER is, of course, an arm's length independent regulator, and we're going to make sure that they will be dealing with all of the new mine applications as well as the existing ones and hold them to the highest possible standard.
I love that clip so much. The AER is arm's length, and that's why we're going to make sure they do the things that we tell them to do. I'm only slightly paraphrasing. That's part of the tragedy of that whole clip. But the other big piece of the clip is it makes it clear that selenium is it's on the list of priorities for the UCP. It's maybe not the biggest one, but it's on the list, and we're gonna leave it to the AER to deal with the selenium questions. I promise you this is going to be relevant in just a minute. But before we do, we got to go to Environment and Parks Minister singing the praises of coal mining because we live in Alberta.
So will you guarantee that there won't be a selenium problem if Grassy Mountain goes ahead?
Here's what I would say. Our job in the Department of Environment is to set the environmental standards. The AER is then the arm's length regulator who ensures that any and all companies, no matter where they are in the province of Alberta, but especially so in southern Alberta, where water and these types of concerns have been raised, that they are adhering to those high standards. If they are not, obviously the AER as the regulator has a number of levers to ensure that they are either brought into compliance or they are not operating in the province of Alberta.
Oh, the AER, they're so hardcore. They are. They, after the toothpaste is out of the tube, they have the very, very, very best of the bounty sheets to give stern looks or something. And some people said that might be perhaps a little bit of a cynical interpretation of who the AER is and what they do. Some people might say otherwise, especially in the light of the story that the Tyee dropped this week. And this is so illuminating. Let's use the word illuminating because that sounds more optimistic. I'm going to read some sections from the story because they are noteworthy. This is a story that was put together by Andrew Nikiforuk, who's been doing quite a bit of coverage of the Grassy Mountain coal mines for the Tyee. From the story, documents obtained by the Tyee show that Peter Doyle, then CEO of Montem Resources, not only fought a request to establish monitoring for the fish-killing toxin and water pollutant at 10 Mountain, but entered into a 2-year-long dispute with the regulator. Also from the story, Montem suggested that the abandoned mine site didn't need a new environmental impact assessment, or EIA, because the study completed 47 years ago adequately described the kind of mining Montem wanted to do, which had not changed significantly in nature, which I think perhaps does not reflect so well on the claims that we've seen by Brian G. and Rebecca Schultz and Premier of Alberta Danielle Smith, in that the coal mining technology has improved light years over the last few decades. Except Montem said that they were not going to do anything differently than had been proposed 47 years ago. Concentrations at a settling pond below Tent Mountain were found to be 151 micrograms per liter. This is of selenium. The Alberta government limit for aquatic protection remains 2 micrograms per liter. The federal guideline is 1 microgram per liter. According to the AR briefing notes, Doyle stated that adding regulatory requirements is unacceptable because nothing had changed at the mine site for decades and the mine had been reclaimed. Doyle added that the company would not do such monitoring. Moreover, Montem will go to all of your bosses and sue. So the very nice people who are from not Alberta came to Alberta and said, we will do what we damn well please. Damn you and your environmental regulations. And if you don't like it, we'll sue you. We'll sue your bosses. That's a terrible Australian accent. I apologize to the 3 of our Australian listeners. According to the AR account of the dispute, the issue with Montem was not resolved until June 2023. That's when the AR actually reduced requirements for acute lethality monitoring. So, in a nutshell, there's this coal mining company, and they say, oh, we'd like to mine some of that coal, please. And the AER, the arm's length regulator that has many tools at their disposal to ensure that selenium does not reach unsafe levels, said, we would like you to do some monitoring, please. And the coal company said no. And the AR came back with a strong, okay, but what if we change the levels that you have to monitor for? What if we do that instead? That's the robust response that the AR had to at their disposal, that Rebecca Schultz has so much confidence in regards to protecting Albertans. They literally changed, they reduced the requirements for monitoring. And this is a quote, the acute lethality. So we're not talking about like the long-term lethality. We're monitoring what's going to kill you the quickest. We will monitor that less for you now. Coal company. So that's our first fun little moment of the show. But you know what? I have been excited for this. I teased this earlier in the week. We got what I'm about to talk about next. We got this on Monday. And it's a special little treat because it's literally been like a year and a half in the making. Let's talk for a moment about our dear friends at the Western Standard, because there's so very, very, very much to talk about tonight. Let's start with my personal favorite little bit that from this whole, I mean, it's not, there's so many good bits to choose from. The Western Standard, for anyone who's unfamiliar, we're going to back this up with some receipts in a second. They've got some strong thoughts about government-funded media. Oh, they're the worst. Those CBC bastards, Eastern bastards at the CBC, they're so terrible until you have to do election night coverage at the Western Standard.
Okay. Well, so one thing we're going to be doing tonight, I'll mention it so we don't get sued. The CBC might not be the greatest news organization around, but it has a lot of money, and therefore it has a lot of resources to build good tech or pay for good technology around these election trackers. So that's what we're using tonight. Let's put that election tracker back up on the screen so people can see it. It's that's the Elections Canada.
Yeah, I'm on Elections Canada now.
Yeah,
you want me to go back?
Yeah, go back to the CBC one.
Okay.
So CBC it's a great aggregator of the data as it's coming in. Now, where it says elected, that's where the CBC election desk has declared it. So that's not us, and that's not Elections Canada. That's a call from the CBC. And whatever you think about them, that stuff is going to be generally pretty accurate. There's no sense in calling it wrongly because it won't actually change it. You'll just have to make an embarrassing correction later. So the CBC has no incentive to call that wrong. So let's try to be fair.
Let's do, shall we? 'Twill be fun for all of us, I think, because we're gonna talk about. We did a whole episode a little while ago on the Western Standard. You can go back in the archives and find that one. But there is a piece to that episode that we didn't get the closure that we were looking for on, and we're going to talk about that tonight. And we're going to get a little bit of closure. To start with, we got to talk about the ethos, the raison d'etre of the Western Standard. You see, the Western Standard, since day one, has been touting themselves as independent media that would never, ever, ever take any kind of government funding, because you see, the theory goes, when you take money from the government, when you take any kind of money, let's use the word whatsoever here, when you take money from the government, then you rely on them for things. You rely on them for your operating funds in some capacity. And if you're reliant on anybody, then that could create potentially the risk of perhaps some bias. And we wouldn't want that, would we? I'm paraphrasing, though. I'll just let Derek explain it to you.
Even those few bright spots of independence and free thinking in the mainstream media are now on the government dole and cannot speak without fear that the government could pull their funding at any time. There are a few great journalists in the non-government owned media, but they mostly work for large corporate interests owned and operated out of Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal, and New York. Western voices that speak for the West without fear of what their bosses in Toronto will say, are far and few between. Because we are one of the only genuinely independent media in Canada, we are able to speak freely and cannot be cancelled by Ottawa. Supporting independent media with your membership is the price of having any media left in this country that isn't on the government take. If you want there to be any independent Western media left, then we need you to step up and support it. Without people like you supporting independent media, all that will be left is the corrupt, government-owned, and government-funded press.
That government-owned and government-funded press. Just the absolute worst. But just to make sure, I mean, as you said it like 6 times in the video, but whatever. But just to make sure that we're really speaking fairly, let's go to, it's since been removed from the menu of their website since we did our episode. Funny how that happened. But it's still on their website. The hyperlink still worked, we know, because we checked it. So let's go to the screenshot that we took from our episode back then. And there's one particular line that's really, really quite important. While breaking the mold of old mainstream competitors, we strictly adhere to established journalistic standards. This allows us to straddle a large, mostly empty market between the mainstream and alternative media. The Western Standard proudly refuses to accept any government funding whatsoever. Our readers know this, and it is important. Our readers know this and is important in building a trustable brand with large readership across Western Canada. So you see, the whole reason why the Western Standard refuses to accept any money is so they can build trust with their readers, their audience, because their audience and their readers deserve to trust them. They deserve to know that there's no government influence or government funding. And again, I'll go to that word whatsoever, except, of course, when there is, because it turns out that the Western Standard has taken funding from the government to no small amount. They took a number of grants, a boatload of grants from far back as 2021, going up to, we could see 2023, 2024. They're taking money in 2024. $109,795.37. So for grants alone, this is the publicly available. You go on the Government of Alberta website and you look at the grants thing, and you do the sorting and the searching. For grants alone, the Western Standard has taken more than $100,000 of taxpayers' money in grants. Now, I want to be clear about something here. Well, two somethings. First of all, the breakdown doesn't take any government money from anybody. Not for grants, or I mean, we don't intend to. We rely on our Patreon supporters. But and I don't know that the provincial government, the UCP, would let us have any grants. So do with that what you will. But there's nothing wrong with journalistic entities or media organizations availing themselves of grants. There's nothing wrong with that. The reality is the media landscape is getting harder and harder and harder for journalism, whether you agree with the type of journalism or not, to function. The funding is less. So as is going to be a theme throughout the evening, and I have said many times on the show before, the foundation of a well functioning democracy, of a healthy democracy, is a well-informed electorate. And so journalists, news organizations getting government money is not a bad thing. And there's conversations to be had about the varying quality of journalism that we see across some of these organizations that are accepting grants and other funds, but it's not a bad thing. Where it gets to be problematic, where it gets to be, some people might say, perhaps having the appearance of perhaps being a little bit dishonest, I'll throw it allegedly on there just for shits and giggles, is when you build your entire brand crapping on all of the other media outlets that do avail themselves of government funding. When your whole shtick is, hey, everybody, we don't take any of that dirty government money because we don't want to be influenced. Look at all of those people that do. They, with their dirty hands from their dirty government money, and they're operating in fear, and they'll not tell you the truth like we will. And then you're taking the government money. That's kind of, I believe the technical journalistic term is bullshitty. It's kind of bullshitty because you're kind of misleading people. There's certainly a strong argument to be made of that. But that's not all, because one of the other things that we noticed that we talked about in our episode was the Western Standard was running some banner ads. Now, in the land of marketing, banner ads aren't that the return on investment on banner ads is pretty minimal. You can get banner ads for pretty cheap. So not potentially a big deal, but it was striking that the Western Standard was running these banner ads. We see banner ads about wildfires. We see banner ads about trades. There were some other ones that we collected in that episode that we did. And that made us go, huh. So the Western Standard is having government advertising, but they don't take any money from the government whatsoever. That seems weird. That seems odd. Wonder what's up with that. And there were some folks that were like, they're probably just getting into one of those aggregate advertising things where you sign up and you say, I'll take ads, and then you just take whatever ads show up. But we like to be thorough here if we're going to levy some questions, let's say. And so we filed a FOIP request. And this goes back. You can see we filed the FOIP request on December 2nd, 2023. On December 2nd, 2023, Communications and Public Engagement received your request under the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy FOIP Act for a copy of. Please provide the total amount that has been paid to the media organization, the Western Standard, for any and all government advertising, including but not limited to traffic safety programs, the Tell the Feds program, and the Alberta Pension Plan campaign from the period of October 6, 2022 to December 1st, 2023, giving us roughly a year. And we were told, well, you can have some of the information, but some of it we're not going to give to you, you see. It's privileged. It could hurt businesses if people knew how much people were paying for their advertising. And so what we got was a series of campaigns that very, very clearly demonstrated that the Western Standard had been running multiple advertising campaigns for the Alberta government, presumably taking some form of money, whatsoever for those campaigns, but the amounts were all redacted. The amounts were all hidden, and they refused to give them to us. So that seemed weird. We did what we do, and we contacted the Office of the Information and Privacy Commissioner, and we said, it seems like it might be a little bit of tomfoolery, shenanigans, if you will, here. We would like to file a please look at this. And we did. But in the interim, and in the meantime, and in between time, we also noticed that the counter signal, Kean Bexty's former, still, I don't know, they metastasized with True North. It became a whole thing, and now they're Juno News. But the counter signal was running government ads as well. And that struck us as weird because the counter signal are committed to preserving the freedom and delivering the truth and unbiased, again, non-government funded news. Now, funding literally means money. So if you're going to say that you don't have any government funding, you're saying that you don't receive any government money whatsoever. Western Standard said whatsoever. The counter signal didn't say whatsoever. But it's striking that the counter signal also says we don't take the government monies. And so we did what we do, and we filed a FOIP on them. And it turns out they took a lot of the government monies. Over the course of just a year, the counter signal received over $116,800 for a variety of banner ad campaigns running from the end of December 2023 to the beginning of the end of 2024. So in roughly a year, the counter signal got roughly $120,000 worth of government advertising funding. And if you're like us, you're probably going, wait a second now. The counter signal, you're allowed to have the numbers for the counter signal, but you're not allowed to have the numbers for the Western Standard. That seems weird. So we had another conversation with the Office of the Privacy Commissioner. We're like, hey, this is not up to scratch. We got the counter signal numbers. Why can't we have the Western Standard numbers? And the Office of the Privacy Commissioner went to the Western Standard, and the Western Standard said, no, we're not going to release those numbers. And then somehow at the beginning of this week, they said, yes, we will, in fact, release those numbers. And so here are those numbers. And it turns out for the fiscal year of 2023, there's like $7,000 that's not from 2023 in this particular disclosure. The grand total of funding whatsoever for advertising that the counter signal received from the provincial government for banner ads was $228,000. The counter signal that takes no money from any governments because that would put them at the risk of bias in that period took $228,000. Now, to be clear, that's $228,000 on top of the $100,000 that they took in grants. So in the period of about a year, the counter signal took in a little bit over $300,000 of taxpayers' money for advertising and grants. And that just makes my little heart full because they lied. They lied to people. Well, allegedly, maybe some people might interpret it as lying. They built a brand based on all of these media outlets that take money from the government, whether it's in the form of funding, whatsoever is the word that they chose to use. That is not me putting words in their mouth. That is not me being hyperbolic. Those are the words that they chose to use. That is the brand that they chose to build. And it was not an accurate picture, which is wild because as Derek Fildebrandt is borrowing, poaching, I don't know. Is poaching the right word? I feel like it might be, but I don't know. It feels like there might be some complex history there. I'm not sure, but we'll go with it. As Derek Fildebrandt is poaching, apparently without permission from the CBC, and trash talking the quality of news that the CBC produces. He's doing the exact same thing that the CBC is doing, albeit clearly to a smaller scale, because the $300,000 that Derek Fildebrandt got clearly, or the Western Standard got, my apologies, Derek, clearly didn't go towards building the infrastructure for covering elections, because they had to poach from the CBC. Moving on from there. That was so satisfying. It was like 2 years, almost to the day. It was like 2 years for us to get that answer, because the Western Standard refused to give us that, refused to allow the government of Alberta to release that information, which in and of itself, I'm sure some people might find or might interpret as being somewhat damning. Because if you're saying, hey, it would hurt our business if people knew that we've actually been taking the better part of more than $300,000 in one fiscal year, then that would hurt our business. That almost seems like, I'm sure some people, I'm not saying I would, but I'm sure some people would probably look at that as an admission that maybe they know that they misled people. I don't know. That's pure speculation on my part. Moving on from there, though, we got to talk about this photo, because this photo has gotten a lot of attention over the last little bit. And credit where credit is due. There's a lot of people who lifted the photo and just started putting it up, but credit where credit is due. This photo was actually from a post that Catherine Grukowski put up. Catherine Grukowski is a reporter who follows the goings-on in the legislature, and she does amazing, amazing work. And we're going to rely on a good chunk of what she does for part of tonight's episode. So we're giving full props to Catherine for the work that she does. That being said, the picture is a picture of the brand new rug in the Premier's office. And this generated some controversy. And the controversy came because of comments made by former UCP MLA Scott Sinclair. And we're going to play those comments in just a sec. But it's important to remember why I have to say former UCP MLA. Because you see, Scott Sinclair voted against the UCP's most recent provincial budget. He did it because he felt that they weren't funding, especially for his constituency, the roads, the highways, the infrastructure that his constituents, his communities needed. So it's not off brand for Scott Sinclair to say, I'd like to know how the money's being spent, please. But boy, did he bring it up in the legislature this week.
Given that industry is strong in my riding of Lesser Slave Lake, you'd think the people in northern Alberta would be benefiting from their hard work. But this Premier's bloated budget has made them feel like she takes their support, trust, and votes for granted. Given how now it's being reported her out-of-control spending is spilled into her own office with a carpet renovation that would make former Premier Redford blush. To the Premier, do you think spending $250,000 to roll yourself out on a red carpet every day is a responsible way of spending taxpayers' money when you run Trudeau-style deficits?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Yeah, happy to take a budget question, Mr. Speaker. Haven't had many since it was passed. I would say budget 25, you know, it's a tough budget in a tough time. Growing province, 4.4% population growth, doing all that we can to build as many schools as quickly and efficiently as possible, you know, still while protecting our industries and encouraging new investments. So I think it's the right budget for right now, Mr. Speaker. A large contingency, a tax cut to address affordability.
Now, what's fun about that is that's Nate Horner. Yes, that Nate Horner who is implicated in the whole corrupt care scandal in a variety of levels. Nate Horner was asked a question about, hey, you spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on a carpet. Well, there's all this austerity going on. What's the deal there? And he responds by, I'd love to talk about the budget. Thank you for the question, even though that was not the question that was asked of him. But in case you thought that was bad, it actually got worse.
Given that highways and healthcare are the responsibility of the province, and given, like a tale as old as time for Northern Alberta, we watch another premier spend lavishly on wants instead of needs, and given there's now reports that this premier spent up to $300,000 on China for the government house in Edmonton. Mr. Speaker, I don't know if that figure includes the grey stuff. I heard it's delicious. If you don't believe me, ask the dishes. But to the premier, don't you think this kind of luxurious spending sends the wrong message to everyday Albertans when we can't get highways and healthcare?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I agree that this is we are at a moment where Alberta needs to get very serious about the spend. Both sides of the House. You know, the member's not wrong. Highways, hospitals, schools, these are all our fundamental principal concerns, and we need to ensure that dollars go further now than ever. And we have to do that in a time of great inflation, of trade uncertainty, of logistical challenges. So that has to be the priority of all of us, and it will continue to be mine.
Which was a fascinating answer for a whole list of reasons, because as opposed to saying, yeah, I'm going to answer that question with an answer that wasn't in any way tied to the question, he seems to go, yeah, we really do need to, we're not good with money, which is a fascinating admission. Again, that's going to be another theme of tonight's show, regrettably. It's a fascinating admission to make, but it's weird. You have these MLAs like Scott Sinclair, like Pete Guthrie, who've been kicked out of caucus, and Danielle Smith refuses to answer the questions. He sends up one of her minions. Not so much with your province, your premier, though.
I would like to know why the premier put over $400,000 on a carpet that you walk on and claw back $200 for disabled. I'm not disabled. I'm a senior, but I do know a lot of disabled people that want to live in their home yet. And she clawed back $200 for the disabled. Some of them are skipping meals. So they can't eat. I'd like her to live on what the disabled are living on. I'm not disabled. I'm a senior, but I've been working with volunteering, basically, for those people. And I would like to know why would she do something like that and spend over $400,000 on a carpet she's going to walk on. She had my vote a couple times, but she will not get my vote this time. And
Agnes, we'll let the premier answer that one. There was also a text message about a story on 880 Ched about a carpet renovation costing hundreds of thousands of dollars. So, Premier Smith, you're on.
Well, infrastructure makes has to do maintenance of our buildings, and the buildings in the legislature, the buildings in Government House, they're government buildings, and from time to time, carpets wear out. They get holes in them. They get frayed. Most carpets only last 5 to 7 years. This one was over 20 years old, and a decision was made to replace it. 6,500 square feet. This is just be prepared. There's always going to be maintenance renewal that has to be done on a regular basis for government buildings. There's lots that you can go through and find lots and lots of repairs that have been done. And if you don't do that, you get an Auditor General report, which we just did, saying you cannot, that we're violating our fiduciary responsibility to care for our buildings by not doing replacements. So these are things that have to be done, and there's a regular schedule and a budget for them.
Now, it's not a terrible answer as long as you don't look past the shiny surface of it, or the fluffy surface, as the carpet may be, because there's a couple pieces that are in there. The first piece is, she says a decision was made, as if we're all to believe that Danielle Smith has no say whatsoever in the type of carpet that was to be put in her office. That's a little bit more than a stretch, to be gentle. It's a little bit more of a stretch. People have done the math on the amount that was involved, and it is disproportionate to what you would expect a regular carpet purchase to be. I find myself wondering, maybe why not go with tile? It's easier to clean, lasts longer. There's lots of options. Beside the point. But she also, again, really distanced herself from taking any sort of responsibility for the situation. She made it sound very much like a decision was made. It's out of my hands. We have to do this stuff because otherwise the Auditor General might do a report, and we don't like those Auditor General reports these days, now do we? We would have had to get the previous carpet to have all of the conversations through the Auditor General, through our legal team. Oh, that would have gotten so expensive. Can't have that. So we had to do the carpet, is the basic argument. But what she didn't address immediately was the messaging that having luxury carpet, like, no matter how you cut it, for the cost of this is some of the most expensive high-end carpet that a person could possibly put in. $300,000. That's a lot of I'm sure it's very nice for the toes and the scrunching and all of that, but that's a very expensive carpet. Why is that something that needed to be done right away at that time with that quality of carpet when there are people who are suffering? And Danielle Smith is clawing back $200 a month from folks on AISH. The federal government is instituting a program where they are giving every province, every person who's on disability, $200. If they meet the criteria and they fill out the little form, they get an extra $200 a month. And we had a whole conversation with our disability panel about this issue, because it does make a difference. The reality is AISH does keep people under the poverty line. And I got to say, one of the things that I loved about the folks that we had on our panel is they made it very, very clear. It is successive governments. So it's not just the UCP. It's not just the NDP. It's not just the PCs before them who have not done a good job of making sure that the people who rely on the province for support get it. Nobody has done a great job of it. But that is not at all how Danielle Smith portrayed it.
The issue about disability, though, is that we have been challenging other provinces and the federal government to match our very generous support for assured income for the severely handicapped. We are the highest in the country. We just increased it again by 2%, so the highest amount is $1,901.
Now, what about Agnes's claim that it was clawed back $200?
Every other province is $500 or more lower than we are. So we've been asking the federal government to help cost share that, and they've come through with that. They've asked every province to come up to $1,811, and they put in $200 to help towards that. So we are still well above that 1,811 mark, and that's the reason why we were pleased to see that the federal government is cost sharing on us. So it is going to be part of the consideration around income that you're allowed to earn on AISH, and that is part of the reason why it is going to be reduced. But we're challenging all of the other provinces to be as generous as we are. We continue to be hundreds of dollars per month above everybody else. We continue to cover all of the supports for medication, which is substantial for those who are on assured income for the severely handicapped. We have rental supplement supports. We make sure that we take care of those who are the most vulnerable better than anyone else. And we're bringing in a new program to allow for those who have the capacity to earn more money to keep more of what they earn until they get up to about $55,000 before it's fully clawed back. So we're doing everything we can to make sure that that community is respected and supported.
And that's some bullshit. That is some bullshit. Everything that we can, we are doing everything that we can to make sure that that group of people is supported and respected. Bullshit. You're taking money that doesn't cost you anything to let these people have out of their pockets. And the line, again, to be clear, AISH keeps people below the poverty line in Alberta, period, end of sentence. Saying, hey, you know what? We're keeping people under the poverty line, but not as much as some of the other provinces, is like being presented with a situation where you have a person who is drowning. They do not have the ability on their own to extricate themselves from that body of water that they're drowning in. And rather than lift them out of the water, your response is instead to go, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'm going to throw you, we'll give you a couple packing peanuts. You can hold on to those. Hold on to those packing peanuts really, really tight. You know what? The good news is, I know we're only throwing you packing peanuts, but we're going to give you 5 more packing peanuts than any other of the other provinces are going to give you. It's ludicrous and it's offensive. And I can only imagine how people who rely on AISH to make ends meet as best they can, because as we heard from our disability panel, what the very angry lady said who asked the question said is not wrong. In fact, it's very accurate. There are people who skip meals. There are people who aren't able to get the food, get the things, because AISH keeps them below the poverty line. And to try to take a victory lap on the backs of some of the most vulnerable people in the province displays not only a impressive level of indifference, but a complete willingness to manufacture a reality that is not real. That's what Danielle Smith did in that whole statement where she talked about AISH. She said, well, we're glad the federal government is cost sharing. We're taking that money that is meant for those people, and we're going to call it cost sharing. We're the most generous. We're so generous. We're doing everything we can to make sure that these people know that they're important and they're respected. We're doing everything. Going on a radio show and speaking about a program that for many doesn't even reach the bare minimum, as if you're doing some sort of wonderful charitable act better than anybody else, is a lie. And everybody who hears Danielle Smith's version of those events, who isn't on AISH or doesn't talk to people who are on AISH or doesn't know somebody who's on AISH, is going to hear that and go, I guess we are doing pretty good. Danielle Smith said so. She's manufacturing a reality that doesn't exist. And that's horrifying. But it's kind of her jam. And this all feeds into the bigger point that we're going to make at the end of the night. But before we do that, we got to talk about Bill 54, because damn, this thing is, you can't even call it a firecracker. It is an atom bomb. It is crazy how much damage this bill is going to do. The idea behind it is Alberta is going to overhaul a bunch of different things. One of the things that they're overhauling is election spending. So they're going to reallow unions and corporate spending. They're increasing the election spending limits. So how much all of the different people can spend. They're banning the vote tabulators because there's no good reason. There's just no good reason. It's conspiracy theory bullshit. And it's easier to ban something that allows for elections to happen quicker, for people to get the results of elections quicker, than it is to say to people who have gone down the QAnon, Donald Trump rabbit hole, that's simply not true. There's a difference between an electronic voting machine and an electronic voting tabulator. And I'm sorry that David Parker has done a hot garbage job of explaining that to you, to exploit you, but it's simply not true. That's a responsible answer. What's the province's response? What's Danielle Smith's response? We'll just ban them. And as well, they've made some major changes to two other little Democratic programs. One of them is the recall. So the criteria in order to recall politicians. The other is around citizen-initiated referendums. And this is where we got to just touch on one little thing before we move on from there, because they had a press conference and a lot of different things came up at the press conference. We're going to deal with the little ones first, and then we'll move to the bigger ones. But one of the questions that came up is, with these changes, you will now be able to, without your family members' consent, buy a party membership for them.
Investigation of the UCP in leadership races. These changes would permit people to buy party memberships for a spouse or other family. It does not require their consent, and there's no dispute mechanism. So let's say my husband wanted to buy an NDP membership so he could cast 2 ballots for Nenshi in the leadership review. I would have no way of saying unacceptable. So who was asking for this and why?
Well, I think generally speaking, families typically have these conversations amongst each other, and they work together. They talk about where their political views are leaning towards. They look to talk and discuss important issues of the day together. We'd like to think that that happens in most families, if not all. And certainly having the ability to, for one individual to purchase a membership for a spouse or a child is not intended to indicate or to suggest that there would be, some nefarious type of approach. What it was intended to do is allow for one individual in a family to be able to make a purchase, a bulk purchase, if you will, for direct family members when those family members are all in agreement. We don't presuppose that any family member will buy multiple memberships to cast multiple votes for any individual, and we certainly would not suggest that that is appropriate whatsoever. But families typically talk about these things at the dinner table, and they have the opportunity to purchase memberships using one credit card from one individual in the family seems to be the natural way that families typically do this, and I think it's appropriate that we allow them to do that.
To be more direct, we're actually going to hold the NDP to the same strict standard that we have in the UCP. The UCP has always said you can only buy a membership for yourself or a close family member. You can't bulk buy memberships. And so this will ensure that all political parties have to follow that same strict rule in leadership contests.
You see, it's the NDP. I love Mickey Amory trying to say, "Oh, all families always act in good faith. Nobody would ever buy a membership for somebody in their family." That we wouldn't want to presuppose that. That would be ridiculous. It's not like there was a whole RCMP investigation that confirmed that on some scale that thing did happen in the UCP leadership race that saw Jason Kenney get elected. But it wasn't enough to change the outcome. So it's all cool. But yeah, like we wouldn't want to. It's not like we have an established history of that happening in our party, the UCP. Nope, none of that. So it's a little bit bonkers. But of course, Daniel Smith then has to go, well, it's about making sure that the NDP are held to the same standards as we are. But what? Because if the argument is somebody in the NDP can buy a membership for one of their family members using a credit card, and that's bad, they've just changed the rules to allow that for themselves. It's very confusing, you see, because what Daniel Smith just said was complete opposition to, again, the reality of the situation, which is a little, some people might say, problematic. But there's other changes. So one of the big changes is they're changing the financial contributions. So corporations and unions can make contributions to parties, constituency associations, leadership contests, third-party advertisers. And that's a problem because it's the third-party advertisers that are able to do all of the dirty work that political parties don't want to do. We saw that certainly in the most recent federal election, where there are a lot of third-party advertisers who were casting a lot of aspersions and saying some really gross things in order to try to sway things for their particular party, because they have that perception of, well, see, but it's a third-party advertiser. It's not Daniel Smith saying these things. You see, it's Alberta United or whatever. The bill also proposes changing the formula-based approach to provincial election spendings to a limit of $5 million for each registered political party, which is, I would make the argument, an insane amount of money, given the whole age conversation that we just finished having. But what do I know? Expense limits per candidates are set to rise from $75,000 to from $60,800. And expense limits for parties in a by-election. Hey, do we have any by-elections coming up? So weird. Will grow from $75,000 to $75,000 from $28,000. So they're tripling effectively the amount that can be spent in a by-election. That's just a wild coincidence. But where it got really heated was around the changes to referendums.
We are expanding opportunities for Albertans to be involved in direct democracy by making changes to the threshold needed for successful citizens' initiatives. The signature collection time for citizens' initiatives will be extended from 90 days to 120 days. We are also improving the process by setting the threshold to be 10% of the number of eligible voters who participated in the last general election, as opposed to being either 10 or 20% of total registered voters.
So she's lowering the bar for recall and for referendums. For recall, the time limit for a recall petition is down from 18 months to 12 months. They're extending the time for signatures for recall for 60 days to 90 days. And they're reducing the standard for recall vote to be authorized from 40% of the total number of electors to 60% of the total number of electors who voted in the most recent election, which is a smaller number when you consider how many people actually show up to vote in elections. And they're also getting rid of vouching, which is, again, dissonant given we're making democracy more accessible. It's a fascinating little approach. But where things really got heated had to do with the citizen-initiated referendum and the lowering of the bar, because right now, petitions must have signatures from 10% of registered voters province-wide. That is rising, and that can go up to 20% on other issues. The bill seeks to lower that bar from 10% of the number of eligible voters who voted in the last election. So it's not the total number of people eligible to vote. It's only a percentage of the people who voted, which brings down the threshold by a whole lot.
To Alberta separating? I feel that question wasn't directly answered.
Well, not by me. I believe in Alberta's sovereignty within a united Canada. However, there is a citizen-initiated referenda process that if citizens want to put a question on a ballot and get enough of their fellow citizens to sign that petition, then those questions will be put forward. Again, I don't want to prejudge what a question might be, but not by our government.
So Danielle Smith is turning around and saying, hey, you know what? I'm going to make it a lot easier for people to do the thing. But gosh, if somebody decides to hold a referendum on separatism, I wouldn't have any control over that at all. I'm not going to do that. And we used this rather blunt metaphor on our social media earlier this week, but it's kind of like walking into a preschool and leaving a loaded gun on the floor and then just walking away. Well, I didn't pull the trigger. Who could have known what was going to happen? It's irresponsible. And particularly when we talk about the kind of rhetoric and the kind of information that is information, heavy on the air quotes for that one, but the information that's out there in the ether, it's very, very dangerous because there's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of disinformation that exists on the issue of separatism. And some of that disingenuousness in regards to whether or not there was going to be a separation referendum was quickly dispelled from none other than the UCP party president. Rob Smith posted on social media, please do not expect a statement from our premier party about independence, since we are not a party with independence in our platform. We don't even have a policy giving consideration to independence. But our premier has just made an announcement that lowers the bar on the ability of our Albertans to trigger what so many are talking about today. Given this legislation is already forthcoming, it is once again obvious that our UCP government, led by our leader, Danielle Smith, listens to and knows what Albertans want. And if they want a referendum on independence, they'll get it. So it's very, very clear that the notion that, oh yeah, no, nobody could have seen the separation thing coming, that's just so crazy. I don't want to presuppose. They love that word this week, presuppose. And it didn't take long for other folks to figure it out and to pick up on that. The Sturgeon Lake Cree Nation and the Mikisew Cree Nation put out a letter and then CC Danielle Smith on the letter. They put out a letter to Danielle Smith, and then they CC'd current Prime Minister, Mark Carney, from their letter to Danielle Smith. You are attempting to manufacture a national unity crisis by enabling a referendum on separatism and a fanatical cell of individuals at the exact moment when Canadians need to unite against Donald Trump's America. The province of Alberta is on treaty lands. Please be advised that your irresponsible statements and actions are in breach of treaties number 6, 7, and 8. We demand that you immediately stand down from this conduct. Our treaties are sacred covenants and are to last forever. Alberta did not exist when our ancestors agreed to share this land with the Crown. The province has no authority to supersede or interfere with our treaties, even indirectly by passing the buck to a citizen referendum. If you or any Canadians are not happy living on treaty lands, they are free to apply for citizenship elsewhere. And then they CC'd Mark Carney and were like, Mark, would you please do something about this here? But they weren't the only ones who weighed in on this as well. The Satellite Cree Nation also issued a statement. And they had some very, very strong words in that statement, too. We will not stand idly by as your government attempts to erode and undermine the agreements that precede your province's existence. The treaties are not symbolic. They are binding legal commitments that your government must honor. Any move to nullify or sidestep them is a declaration of open hostility against our peoples. Furthermore, your rhetoric and actions are stirring unrest and threatening the stability of both Alberta and Canada. This separatist agenda is not merely a provincial issue. It risks economic turmoil, social division, and national instability. Our treaties are non-negotiable, and any attempt to infringe on them will be met with unwavering resistance. And that, to be clear, is just a sampling from the letters. If you want to read the full letters, you can find them on all of the Facebook pages for all of the respective nations. We have them on all of our social media as well. But I would encourage you to go check out the sources because that's important to do. So those letters came out. We're doing this in chronological order. Those letters came out. Danielle Smith had a press conference the day after those letters came out, where she was announcing that despite having told the federal government, because she's so trustworthy, you see, that she was going to give them 6 months to change 9 things. She had a long shopping list of things that she wants Mark Carney to do within 6 months, or there's going to be trouble. And she's the one who used national unity crisis. So it's fascinating that in the run-up to the election, the federal election, Danielle Smith was all, oh, if you don't do this, there's going to be a national unity crisis. And then she throws the gasoline on the kindling and hands the matches to a bunch of folks. The press conference was interesting.
And I need to ask about this lawsuit or referring this issue to the Court of Appeal. Can you just walk me through the timeline here, because I'm confused. In March, the Premier had a list of 9 demands to whomever becomes Prime Minister, and one of them was this issue, to address this issue. Mark Carney hasn't appointed a cabinet yet. We don't know who the Environment Minister is. We have not hit that 6-month mark. You haven't. It seems like they haven't even had a chance to address this. So why are you bringing this forward now?
Well, most certainly. Let me take you back just a little bit. We know that the clean electricity regulations were introduced in 2024. We tried, and we tried to work with the federal government to try and provide our input time and again to see if we could help address some of our concerns. They were ignored. During the course of the election, as you already know, Prime Minister Carney doubled down repeatedly on his position as it relates to various things, including the clean energy regulations. We've seen no indication that it is going to change. It is our intention now to refer the matter to the Court of Appeal. Now, the process, as you asked about, is that we will refer it today to the Court of Appeal. We will work with the Court of Appeal on scheduling. Our internal counsel will be handling this matter, and we'll just move through the process like we always do.
So we didn't like what they said in the election, so we're going to go ahead and disregard what we said we were going to do and do this new thing that we said that we were going to do the whole time. Again, we're changing the reality of the conversation. And it wasn't the only place that happened.
What's actually happening with the pension plan initiative?
Well, I have said that I would put it to the people if I saw evidence they wanted to vote on it. I'm not seeing that at the moment. I think part of it is that we don't have all the answers that we were hoping for from the federal government about what the transfer would be. But again, that's another issue that could be put to citizen initiative. If I'm misreading the public on that, and they want to have an actual vote on it, then that's another issue that could be put forward by citizen initiative. But at the moment, I'm seeing, again, same results you are. I'm not seeing that there's an appetite to put it to the people at the moment.
So again, we're playing with words. We're having fun with words because on one hand, Danielle Smith is saying, and she was very, very clear throughout the pension consultation process, that if they did not see overwhelming support, they wouldn't go ahead with a referendum. And so she's saying there, hey, we're not going to go ahead with a referendum. We don't see the support. But, you know, if you want to, pick up the gun. That's a very old movie reference. That's a deep cut. But that's what she's saying. I can't do this. I don't have the social license to make a referendum on the pension happen. But, you know, for you folks over at the Alberta Prosperity Project, if you wanted to do this, I'm not saying that you're building a giant database right now of people who have said that they'll sign just about anything because they spend all of their time being angry. But, you know, you could do it if I don't want to get in trouble is what it is. I don't want to be the one blamed for it. So how about you do it for me, please? That's what she's saying. And it's unbelievably not just irresponsible, but it's profoundly disingenuous. And it's profoundly disingenuous because she's supposed to be the leader of the province. She's supposed to be the one setting the tone. But instead of leading, she's leaning into pure populism. And she's trying to justify it by using the United States as an example.
You're saying that this would be the purest form of democracy, but you've also lowered the threshold for any referendum to happen, which we know will very much probably include a referendum on Alberta separatism. Are you risking the province's relationship with Indigenous people to appease a vocal minority who want to separate from Canada?
The changes that are proposed in the Elections Act, I had put in the minister's mandate letter when I first signed off on it in 2023. And it was in looking at the way in which propositions are put forward around the world, in particular California, which seems to have the most successful opportunity for citizens to engage in the process. They have anywhere from 5 to 10 propositions every year, but their measures are actually quite a bit lower than ours. It's 5% for a statutory change based on the previous level of vote for the governor, and 8% for constitutional changes. So actually ours is still higher than what we see in other jurisdictions. It needs to be high, but it also needs to be achievable, and that's what we're trying to achieve with this balance.
Sorry, I just feel like I'm not getting an answer, though, on whether this could be a risk in terms of the province's relationships with Indigenous people.
Well, I'm not going to prejudge what citizens are going to do for a petition. Once there's a petition on the table and there's an active discussion from citizens having achieved the requisite number of signatures, I'd be happy to answer your question. Right now, this is just enabling legislation so that any citizen is able to go out, garner signatures, and if they're successful, then I guess you can ask me to comment on what is actually on the table. You're putting forward a hypothetical that doesn't exist.
Again, which is profoundly disingenuous. Because what Danielle Smith is saying, it is in effect that she doesn't have the faculty, she doesn't have the wherewithal to be able to look at the lay of the land and go, I wonder what people might do. I wonder if I should anticipate what political crises might come about because of my changes to the fundamental laws that govern how democracy works in the province of Alberta. Why would you want me to possibly game out the consequences of my actions? I'll just be a bull at a $300,000 china shop. It's ludicrous. And the fact that she thinks that's an acceptable answer speaks to what she's trying to get to. And what she's trying to get to is the purest form of democracy. You see, it's all about the voice of the people. It's all about populism. More on that in just a little bit. But she was also asked specifically if the president of the UCP is able to go on social media and say, hey, everybody, totally going to be a separation referendum. Why can't you?
It kind of feels like you're being disingenuous here. You're not acknowledging what your party president said. You're not acknowledging that there are people gathering outside the legislature today calling for a separation referendum, you're not acknowledging that there are many groups of people in this province who read your proposed legislation as an open door, as an invitation to bring this referendum forward. I mean, do you acknowledge that this has opened the door for them to get it? This is fanning the flames of the fire. Well, I acknowledge that.
I can read the media just as you can, and I can read the polls just as you can. And Angus Reid did a poll a couple of weeks ago that said that there was independence support of 25% of Albertans and higher, I think 33% of Saskatchewan residents. That seems to me that the majority of people are not in favor of that. And so I guess we'll see whether or not they're able to put together a petition, gather enough signatures, and put it to the people. I think you're kind of jumping ahead a few steps. We have initiative legislation that has been in the works from my minister since I wrote his mandate letter in 2023, when this was not an active conversation. This legislation came forward now because we have a whole pile of rules that we need to change, because we have to start preparing for a provincial election in 2027. So this is just part of the process. And we had heard from the public on both our recall legislation and our citizen initiative that the bars were set too high, and they wanted us to bring them down so that certain questions could be achieved through a petition campaign at a more reasonable level. We looked around the world. We looked at California, which I think is really the hallmark of this type of legislation, and we brought our amounts down to align with that.
So Danielle Smith knows. She knows the support for this isn't there. But what she's doing is lowering the bar even further to make sure that the limited amount of support that exists is able to pull the trigger on a referendum that, by the way, taxpayers are going to be footing the bill for, that is going to generate a stunning amount of mis- and disinformation from people who are not authorities on the subjects for which they're claiming to speak. All of that is fine, and she's going to make it easier for them. So this is nothing more than a cynical distraction of her base and an appeasement of her base at the taxpayer's expense. But again, it gets bigger than that, because the problem gets back to the more heightened the conversation, the more gasoline on the fire, the more false claims that people make, the more false confidence that people give themselves because they read something that their Uncle Barney posted on Facebook, and I really want it to be true. I just really, really want it to be true, so I'm going to believe it. All of those things are going to happen. All of those things are going to cause further division, further damage to our democracy. But Danielle Smith doesn't care about any of those things because she wants the purest, most uncut form of democracy, apparently. Which brings us back to the letters. And as we go through the next 10, 15 minutes of the show, one thing that I really want to highlight before we go into it is Danielle Smith has had a fascinating relationship with First Nations folks in the province of Alberta. She has at times claimed to be Métis with no documentation. She has at times claimed to be Cherokee with no documentation. And in fact, APTN did an investigative piece where they tried to find any evidence and they could find none. So Danielle Smith is very, very good at putting on the pretendian clothes when it suits her. She's also very, very good about talking about how important the First Nations folks are to her when it benefits her. We've heard her talk about economic corridors, and we can use the relationship with First Nations and the treaty lands and the reservations to get around all of those bothersome federal environmental laws because they're sovereign nations of themselves. And so we can use that to get what we want economically, which is a pretty gross way of talking about it. But she was asked about the letter.
There was a letter sent to yourself and one also sent to the Prime Minister from the Chief of Sturgeon Lake Cree Nation and the Chief of the Mikisew Cree First Nation. They say that you're attempting to manufacture a national unity crisis by enabling a referendum on separatism. My question to you is, what will your government do to ensure any referendums respect and do not breach Treaties 6, 7, and 8?
Well, first, let me say that we respect all of the treaty rights that are enshrined in the Constitution under Section 35. And the Citizen Initiative Act is not new legislation, and it was never designed to, nor does it breach treaty agreements. The Citizen Initiative Act, I think, is the purest form of democracy we have, and it gives all Albertans an opportunity to play a direct role in the democratic process by inviting them to have a direct say on issues their fellow citizens want to put to the people. Any Albertan can put an idea forward on any topic, and if they're able to get the number of signatures, then it would go to a vote, and that includes a vote of members of First Nations, and we encourage Indigenous peoples to participate in the process.
Oh, see, so I promise it's not violating the treaties. I don't know how anyone could possibly walk away with that impression. And they can vote in the referendums too, so it'll be fine, which is paternalistic to say the very least. But it wasn't the only question she was asked on that.
Asking you to speak directly to those First Nations leaders, there's some strong language in here calling your statements and actions irresponsible and demanding you step down from your conduct immediately. What is your response directly to them, and how would you characterize, I guess, your perception of your relationship with them when they are seeming quite frustrated?
Well, I can see that the media is trying to describe this legislation as something it's not. It's a citizen initiative change that any petition can come forward. I gave some examples in the legislature yesterday. In California, which is a very left-wing jurisdiction, they have brought forward petitions on rent control. They brought forward petitions on legalizing cannabis. I would just encourage people to not look at this through an ideological lens. If you've got an issue that is important to you, that you think can garner the support of your fellow citizens, get out there. Start a petition campaign once this legislation is passed. You have 120 days. You'll be able to, based on the previous voter turnout, you'd be able to get 177,000 signatures, and you can put it to the people in the next scheduled referendum election.
So you see what happened there. The first blame was the media. Oh, I see how the media is trying to characterize it. And those signatories, those two chiefs, they should really be thinking for themselves and not just believing what the media has said. Because boy, that media. So you see, we're demonizing the media again. We're going back to that theme of the media must be lying. The media must be misrepresenting things. It's just those two chiefs. They really just need to sort of get themselves away from the media and start thinking from themselves. It's not like there's a collective voice that has raised. Oh, wait. Yes, there is. May 1st, the Piikani Nation released a statement. There is no question that the results of the recent federal election have exacerbated pre-existing regional tensions in Canada. It is understandable that many people in the West are frustrated that their rejection of the Liberal Party was not mirrored in other parts of Canada. That frustration has led to several initiatives seemingly designed to give Albertans a path to renegotiation of confederation and indeed separation. There's talk of a What's Next panel to discuss alternatives to the federal status quo. Premier Smith and her government introduced Bill 54, lowering the threshold for signatures required to place a separation question on the ballot. Some organizers are claiming that they are already gathering signatures at a rate that would reach this threshold. It is at this point that First Nations in Alberta, representing Treaties 6, 7, and 8, must remind Albertans and their leaders that the aforementioned treaties predate Alberta. Those are treaties with the Crown, and Alberta lacks the authority to interfere with or negate those treaties. Proceeding down a path towards separation cannot be undertaken without the consent of Alberta's First Nations. We are here. We will aggressively protect our historic treaty rights and our inherent rights, and we will require that the Crown's obligation to First Nations be honored and fulfilled. But wait, they're not alone either, because the Four Nations of the Musqueam Treaty, from Treaty 6, Musqueam Cree, also weighed in. Reading from their letter, there can be no citizen-led referendum on Alberta separation. These treaties are sacred agreements entered into with the Crown, and they continue in perpetuity. Our treaties cannot be altered without our agreement. The Natural Resources Transferred Agreement with transferred Crown lands and mineral rights from Canada to Alberta was never consented to or authorized by First Nations. We never surrendered subsurface rights to the land below the depth of the plow. Alberta has no authority to attack our treaty, Aboriginal, and inherent rights. Our sovereignty and inherent rights to govern ourselves cannot be overlooked and must be recognized. We, as leaders of the Treaty 6 First Nations, condemn Bill 54, which is an insult to the spirit and intent of the treaties. But they're not alone either. Onion Lake Cree Nation weighed in on May 1st as well. Onion Lake Cree Nation is in active litigation with Alberta against the Alberta Sovereignty Within the United Canada Act to ensure our treaty is upheld and honored. We remind Alberta that no separation will happen without the free, prior, and informed consent of Treaty First Nations. Let us be clear. Our treaty and the ongoing treaty obligations are not dissolved by questions in a referendum. We call upon the Premier to stop this dangerous and inflammatory separatist rhetoric. Also on May 1st, the Sunchild First Nation weighed in. Also on May 1st, the Blackfoot Confederacies weighed in. Also on May 2nd, the Peerless Trout First Nation weighed in. On May 1st, the Confederation of Treaty 6 First Nations. This is all of the First Nations in Treaty 6. May 2nd, all of Treaty 7 First Nations Chiefs Associations. 4 chiefs, the Tsuut'ina Nation, the Bearspaw Nation, the Chiniki Nation, and the Goodstoney Nation, all condemning this legislation. And on May 2nd, Treaty 8 First Nations weighed in, all condemning. And the Treaty 8 folks, they pulled no punches. Let us be absolutely clear. Our nations do not and never will consent to the separation of territories protected in our treaty. Alberta lacks the authority to assert independence over treaties beyond its jurisdiction. Any attempt to do so is illegal and undermines the foundational agreements that facilitated the establishment of the province. The treaties are constitutional instruments of enduring nation-to-nation agreements. Provincial actions that attempt to dismiss or displace them not only threaten our rights, but the legal framework of our country. Alberta's aspirations for separation or expanded sovereignty have no jurisdictional authority on treaty of lands, nor of the children, families, waters, or resources that our nations have protected since time immemorial. And if you're wondering why having the Treaty 6, Treaty 7, and Treaty 8 First Nations weigh in, here's a map of Alberta. This shows you the land that all of those treaties cover. It's literally the whole province. There's some little nubs of Treaty 10 and Treaty 4 that pop in there. But all of these treaties were signed predating the province of Alberta. And when you have the chiefs, the leaders of all of those treaties stepping forward and saying, this is not okay. This is wrong. This is a violation. It's unacceptable, and you shouldn't be doing it. For Danielle Smith to respond with a flippant, well, it's the media, is unbelievably disrespectful. But again, it was just one press conference. It's not like she doubled down on that line of rhetoric yesterday on Your Province, Your Premier, is it?
Indigenous leaders are warning that the new referendum bill violates treaty rights. So how do you reconcile those two approaches, and what message does this send to Ottawa?
I 100% respect treaty rights. Every piece of legislation that we do is in honor of Section 35 of the Act, of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Everything that I do is changing Alberta's relationship with Ottawa. The First Nations have their own relationship with Ottawa, and it's enshrined in treaty. That does not change. However, I can't prejudge what referendum decisions or petitions might come forward. Right now, there's 0 referendum petitions. There's 0 petitions at all for Citizens Initiative. All there is a law that's been on the books for 6 years now that had a very high threshold that was unachievable, which is maybe part of the reason why we never saw any petitions launched. And now we've made it so that anyone who has a burning issue of any type can bring it forward. But clearly, the First Nations have a special relationship with the Crown, special relationship through treaty, and none of anything we are proposing would ever violate that.
Again, First Nations have a relationship with the Crown, with the treaty. It's not us. I'm not responsible for that. So again, we see how Danielle Smith will, our treaty partners, we're doing the reconciliation. We're doing all of these great, important things right up until collectively the people leading the nations in the 3 biggest treaties in the province of Alberta that cover the overwhelming majority of the geography have said, stop it. Then, I'm not going to listen to them so much. They don't know what they're talking about. I find myself speechless at how disrespectful it is. I have spent my week trying to find the words to articulate the horror and trying to begin to try to understand how this must feel for all of the First Nations that have spoken up and said, stop it. Because this is what we do. As a society, this is what we do. And it's heartbreaking because there are people who want to learn and pursue truth and reconciliation. And the damage that the arrogance that the Premier of Alberta is doing to those efforts and to those relationships, I can only begin to barely imagine. Because I've got no illusions. I sit here I've said it many times before on the show, I'm going to say it again. I sit here in my peak privilege of being a middle-aged white guy. And I can't pretend to understand, to come even close to understanding what it is that being rebuffed and minimized by the Premier of Alberta must feel like. I can't. But I know that for me, it is enraging. It is profoundly disrespectful. It is heartbreaking. And that's for me. So for somebody, for the First Nations folks, the treaty signatories who are saying, please listen to us. And the Premier's going, I don't want to do that. I can't even begin to imagine how that feels. I imagine that it feels like more of the same. And that is the biggest problem with this whole situation. Moving on from there. I told you it's going to be a heavy one, folks. We're not even close to done yet. We got to talk a little bit about Peter Guthrie, because this dovetails into some of the same problems that this whole episode is trying to highlight. And what we're talking about here is Peter Guthrie did some things this week. One of the things that he did was he tabled a bunch of documents. And he also asked some questions inside of the legislature. And it's worth listening to the questions that he asked and the responses that he was given in their entirety. It's a long clip, but I promise you, it's worth it.
The honourable member for Airdrie Cochrane.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier handpicked the AHS CEO and its board. After hardly a year, she fired them all because they were swallowed by the machine. This was a 7-person board containing 3 deputy ministers and the Premier's health guru, former Minister Lyle Olberg. Yet, this Premier lost their confidence. Mr. Speaker, the board was fired because they resisted putting Andre Tremblay at the helm of AHS. To the Premier, is it not a conflict of interest to have the Minister of Health and her former deputy overseeing an investigation in which both are implicated?
The Honourable the Minister of Justice.
Well, Mr. Speaker, thank you to the Honourable Member for that question. The Minister of Health is not overseeing the investigation. The Auditor General's Office is overseeing the investigation. the former Chief Justice from the Provincial Court of Manitoba is overseeing an investigation, Mr. Speaker. Those investigations are independent, and there's a reason for that, Mr. Speaker, to maintain the independence and integrity of those investigations. Unlike the opposition, who do not want to give these investigations a chance to complete, Mr. Speaker, we're prepared to wait and see what the investigations tell us.
The Honourable Member for Airdrie Cochrane.
Mr. Speaker, given the AHS board fully supported their CEO and her probe into potential corruption, and given they backed her investigations into both Tylenol and surgical facilities, and given this UCP government ordered a directive to halt those inquiries, and given the AHS board received advice from 4 independent lawyers advising them to turn over all documents to the AG and police, and given they were terminated immediately after submitting those records to the Premier, why not come clean as to why you really needed to fire the board?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, the materials that have been furnished to the AG now number into the 13,000 or more, Mr. Speaker. There has been full cooperation with the Auditor General. We have been working directly with the Auditor General's office to make sure that the interviews are being facilitated, that document production is being facilitated. Mr. Speaker, everything that we need to be doing to be working with the Auditor General to facilitate the investigation is
Honourable
happening.
Member for Airdrie Cochrane.
Mr. Speaker, given the hand-picked AHS board and its CEO were performing their fiduciary duty to investigate wrongdoing, and given this government refuses to do the same, and given the so-called independent investigation by the UCP is meant as a shield for self-preservation, and given I warned caucus that supporting a whitewashed report that is later proven false by the Auditor General and the RCMP will make you culpable in a cover-up, to the Premier, are you seriously going to stick to the same story under oath when questioned by the AG or the RCMP?
The Honourable the Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we would not presuppose the investigation of an independent office that is conducting that investigation, Mr. Speaker. I would direct the Honourable Member to take a look at the Statement of Defence, which outlines the government's position very clear. Mr. Speaker, the Auditor General is conducting an investigation into the process. We're going to let that process unfold. We're going to wait to see what the results of that investigation are, and if necessary, we'd be happy to take action.
And he also tabled some documents. Now, the documents, these pictures here, again, full props to Catherine Krakowski, because these are, she took the pictures, she posted them on social media. But there's a couple of things that really do jump out about the documents that Pete Guthrie tabled that we want to take a second to talk about tonight. We are reading from the documents that he tabled. There's probably a need for me to say that these documents haven't been tested in a court of law. So I'll say that now. And then I will simply read from the documents, at least the sections. So this one is from a March 17th letter to the Auditor General. And there's some things that he includes. This is the summary of what he's provided to the Auditor General. My personal notes delivered to Cabinet February 11th. 2025. These are the notes that I used to convey my concerns to Cabinet regarding the serious issues at Alberta Health and AHS. The key points outlined in the notes include. So, pausing from reading, this is him saying to the Auditor General on February 11th, I brought these concerns forward to Cabinet. They are aware of all of the things that I'm about to detail here. Fiduciary duty, misrepresentation and omission of key facts. This occurred during the Health Cabinet Committee meeting. He's addressed this in multiple comments before, where he talked about the fact that the dismissal of the board was maybe a little bit shady. Conflict of interest. The Deputy Minister and Minister of Health are leading the investigation, presenting a clear conflict. The CEO dismissal. This is very interesting, and I imagine that if I was Athana Mantzalopoulos' legal team, I would be very excited about this section. Athana was fulfilling her duties as CEO, but was fired because she refused to halt an investigation and declined to sign questionable contracts. Ruh-roh. Board dismissal. The board was removed because they resisted placing Andre Tremblay at the helm of AHS and providing documents to the AG and police. Requests for consideration. Complete and release the PwC report. That's the report that was being done to look into the allegations of malfeasance. Support the Auditor General. Remove Andre Tremblay. Move Minister Lagrange to another ministry. Provide relevant data to the RCMP. Goes on to detail more things that he expressed to cabinet. Minister Amory connection to Mraiche, highlighting concerns about their close relationship. Amory procurement concern, questioning the hiring of JP despite his obvious conflicts of interests. Dale McPhee connection to Mraiche, noting Mraiche's major contributions to the Edmonton Police Foundation, raising further conflicts beyond their close friendship. Other issues with Mraiche contracts: recovery centers, surgical facilities, construction of the Enoch Surgical Center. PPE contract remains sole sourced. The Tylenol contract, and again, it's acetaminophen. It's not Tylenol. Was also sole sourced. Independent school program raises more concerns. Blaine Iskew, conflict of interest, noting involvement across AHS, MH Care, and ASG. While some members in this room supported my concerns, it was not overwhelming, and only a few acknowledged any conflict involving Minister LaGrange. He lists the participants: Premier Smith, Minister LaGrange himself, Minister Jones, and Cabinet. But there was another piece of document that he put out in that package that was very interesting as well. And this had to do with a text message that he included in that deal. So in that whole thing, he included a screenshot of a text message where he spoke with the Premier's right-hand guy, Rob Anderson. And he put that into context in one of the supplemental pieces. This is dated April 25th, 2025. I'm following on my submission from March 7th, 2025 with additional information. Health Cabinet meeting, January 30th, 2025, including my comments from the short notice meeting in which the HS board was dismissed and information was withheld from committee members. As the only committee member to vote against the dismissal of the board, I stated, I feel like I'm missing something here. And when I'm asked to make a quick decision without all the information available, my instinct is to back off. If the board had concerns, perhaps they are justified. Now you added an Athana being fired and this sudden request to give Andre power. I feel like there is more to this story, so I'm going to vote against. I have also included a text message I received immediately following my comments from Rob Anderson, who wrote, probably is more, Pete, but you need to trust that those who are spending hundreds of hours trying to do this work to do their job. Rob also added, you just asked me for the same on the compassionate intervention centers. The last comment referred to a request from the Premier's office for my ministry to commit to building 2 compassionate intervention centers, CICs, by 2027, each at a cost of $230 million. I told Mr. Anderson the goal was not possible, and the centers had not been fully designed, and the earliest realistic timeline would be the end of 2029. In my view, Rob's comparison was not relevant to the conversation at hand. Now, there's a lot to unpack there. There's a lot to unpack there. I mean, first of all, those were tabled on April 29th. And in there, we have allegations, which have alleged it's just alleged. Everything's alleged. Of a very close connection between Minister Amory, the current Justice Minister, and Sam Mraiche, from the highlighting concerns about their close relationship. We have concerns about Sam Mraiche's alleged close connection to Dale McPhee, noting Mraiche's major contributions to the Edmonton Police Foundation, raising further conflicts beyond their close friendship. I'm just reading what's in front of me here, folks. And other issues with Mraiche contracts. The first one on the list is recovery contracts. Have we seen any public reporting about recovery contracts yet? I haven't. I don't know if it's out there. Maybe I've just missed it. But it's fascinating that he includes these notes about recovery centers and then immediately talks about a text message from Rob Anderson that he says was not relevant to the conversation at hand, highlighting the building of recovery centers, each at a cost of $230 million. That is just a super wild coincidence and probably nothing more. Yep. That's all I'm saying about that. But that was on the 29th. And as it turns out, May 1st, Carrie Tate ran a story where she confirmed that she had spoken to Mr. Amory, and Mr. Amory confirmed that, in fact, yes, He and Sam Mraiche are not just very, very close friends, but they're family. Reading from the Globe and Mail article, I'm just going to do a small chunk because I feel like it's kind of pertinent. Andrew Flavel Martin, an assistant professor at Dalhousie University's Schulich, I apologize, School of Law, said Mr. Amory should take steps to formally distance himself from the government handling of Ms. Menzalopoulos' lawsuit. The question I'd be concerned about is how involved is he in just directing the litigation around the wrongful dismissal, given that his friend is involved in one of the contracts, said Professor Martin, whose research focuses on legal ethics for government lawyers and attorneys general. The optics are not good. So, the optics aren't good. And I'm not speaking out of turn when I say Amory was a minister when a lot of these contracts, most, if not all, of these contracts happened. Multiple people, including the former Minister of Infrastructure, described them as being sole sourced contracts, which means there was no RFP, or request for proposal, put out. It was just decided this is the person that we're going to use. Amory has a close relationship with Sam Mraiche. Amory has confirmed this to the Globe and Mail. And there is an ongoing lawsuit between Athana Menzalopoulos, where she is suing Alberta Health Services and the government of Alberta for firing her because she was looking into allegations that there were improprieties involved with all of these figures. So it's a bit of a mess, but it's not great when your justice minister is involved on a personal level with somebody for whom there are all of these allegations that have yet to be tested in a court of law. I'm getting better at this game. Which brings us to, we're just about maybe like half hour left, he said optimistically, if not naively. Which brings us to our continued deep dive on the Athana Menzalopoulos lawsuit. 2 live shows ago, we did her statement of claim. Last week's live show, we did the government's response to her statement of claim. This week, we're taking a look at her response to her statement of claim. And it's not going to be that long because it was shorter. But there's some things that I'm definitely going to read from. And I probably need to again say, I know you're all getting so tired of hearing me say this, but if I don't, my lawyer will kill me. All of these allegations are yet to be tested in a court of law. And boy, are we going to get to that part when I'm done reading these things. So they're not proven. Do that, what you will. Let's get right into it. Starting with, on January 8th, 2025, Menzalopoulos was terminated as CEO and president of AHS on a without cause basis by Deputy Minister of Health Andre Tremblay. That day, LaGrange issued a press statement that said, "Thank you to Athana Menzalopoulos for her dedication, service, and leadership during her time as AHS CEO. Her contributions to improving our healthcare system were important, and we are deeply grateful for all that she's done to advance these efforts." Despite LaGrange acknowledging Menzalopoulos and her dedicated work and leadership at AHS, both LaGrange and AHS have now filed statements of defense that are filled with completely unfounded, entirely fictitious, malicious, and bad faith allegations about Menzalopoulos and her performance while CEO and president of AHS. The allegations, which Menzalopoulos expressly denies, are a blatant, vindictive, malicious, and bad faith attempt to publicly smear Menzalopoulos, damage her reputation and future employment prospects, and deflect from the substance of allegations in the statement of claim. A lot going on there. But perhaps the biggest thing is the claim that she was terminated on a without cause basis. So she wasn't fired, according to the statement that I'm reading from. She wasn't fired because she did a bad job. She was just fired. Moving on from there. Menzalopoulos replies to the completely unfounded bad faith, malicious, and fictitious allegations in the statement of defense as set out in the paragraphs below. Menzalopoulos was specifically hired to help steer AHS through a complicated, multifaceted healthcare refocusing effort, which effort was directed by Alberta Health. Menzalopoulos at all times carried out her duties and obligations with a view to the best interests of AHS, the nature of the publicly funded healthcare system in Alberta, the need to ensure continuity of healthcare services, and in accordance with the best management practices and operational standards. Menzalopoulos reported to the AHS Board of Directors under the terms of her 4-year employment contract. The board had confidence in Menzalopoulos through her work at AHS, and contrary to the false allegations in the defenses, the board did not lose confidence in her at any time. Further, the board never expressed any concerns to her about her performance as CEO and president or about her work in guiding AHS through the bracket often underfunded and poorly articulated closed bracket healthcare refocusing that was being directed at Alberta Health. You might remember from last week, the statement of defense from the government said, oh yeah, the board totally wanted her gone. Here she's saying that's absolutely not the case. Further, LaGrange was satisfied with and, in fact, complimentary of Menzalopoulos and her efforts to guide AHS through a complicated healthcare refocusing effort. For example, and contrary to the false allegations in the defenses about supposed performance issues, on December 2nd, 2024, Menzalopoulos met with LaGrange to discuss the status of the ongoing healthcare refocusing and disaggregation. Editorial comment: I prefer disintegration, but okay, whatever. And disaggregation of AHS. At this meeting, LaGrange told Menzalopoulos she was happy with the work Menzalopoulos had been doing at AHS. Specifically, LaGrange told Menzalopoulos, quote, I think you've done some phenomenal things in Alberta Health Services. Like, honestly, I really do, end quote. Despite LaGrange specifically praising Menzalopoulos' work on December 2nd, 2024, just over 1 month later, on January 7th, 2025, LaGrange was demanding that AHS board fire Menzalopoulos. The following events occurred after the December 2nd, 2024 meeting. On December 13th, 2024, LaGrange had another meeting with Menzalopoulos and AHS board chair Angela Fong. At this meeting, Menzalopoulos explained that the AHS investigation and the forensic audit had revealed several preliminary but potentially very serious concerns, including issues around the involvement of Jitendra Prasad, and another former AHS procurement employee with the CSFs, and a potential conflict of interest around various contracts and the principles of certain service providers and AHS suppliers. At this briefing, LaGrange was specifically asked by board chair Angela Fong, quote, Minister, do you have any concerns entering into contracts which will be competitive and all of the things we describe with individuals that were involved in these potentially very concerning activities, end quote. LaGrange indicated she was not concerned despite the investigations not being completed. For her part, Menzalopoulos did not yet know that the forensic audit had uncovered the actual email account for Prasad at MH Care at the same time he had been employed by AHS in a senior procurement position. This specific information was in a draft report received from the external forensic investigator by AHS that day. Importantly, Deputy Minister of Health, Andre Tremblay, Deputy Minister of Health and Addictions, Evan Romanow, Deputy Minister of Seniors, Community and Social Services, Cynthia Farmer, attended the December 19th, 2024 AHS board meeting in their dual capacities as both deputy ministers with the government and also AHS board members. All three deputy ministers heard the recommendations by other AHS board members that the investigation potentially be expanded and the matter be forwarded to the RCMP for potential criminal investigation. Tremblay, Romanow, and Farmer, in their capacities as deputy ministers, would have advised their own ministers, including Tremblay advising LaGrange about the meeting. The next day, on Friday, December 20th, 2024, AHS sent a letter to MH Care Medical demanding a full accounting and reconciliation of the prepayments AHS made to MH Care for the $70 million that was somehow prepaid by AHS to MH Care for the still unfulfilled provision of children's acetaminophen. Presumably, that is in reference to the fact that allegedly AHS paid out the rest of the contract for the $70 million on speculation that they would eventually down the road be able to use that money for future medications. No concerns about who was holding the money or whether or not it was gathering any interest, allegedly. On December 16th, 2024, AHS was advised by Alberta Health that Tsuut'ina Nation had expressed a desire to the Premier to build a surgical center, and that the Premier may have made some commitments to this group, so expectation management could be challenging. This next line. For her part, Menzalopoulos was not surprised as political interference around AHS-funded procurement had become commonplace. On December 19th, 2024, Menzalopoulos briefed the AHS board about the AHS investigation and ongoing external forensic audit, including now confirmed and serious concerns about Prasad having an email account with MHCare during at least part of the time he was employed by AHS and while he appeared to have been negotiating the purchase of the children's acetaminophen from MHCare. And this is where probably that earlier statement of the three deputy ministers who were also on the AHS board gets to be so relevant. Moving on from there. Menzalopoulos further advised the board that the goals of the investigation and external forensic audit were to determine if a case could be made for return to AHS of the outstanding $49.2 million balance on the MHCare contract for children's acetaminophen and to ensure that new CSF chartered surgical facility contracts could withstand any future scrutiny given the issues that had now been discovered. Members of the AHS board then recommended to Menzalopoulos that the investigation and external audit be expanded, presumably by AHS. Presumably the AHS board members were also air quotes infatuated with the investigations, as LaGrange bizarrely alleges against Menzalopoulos in her statement of defense. That's a verbatim reading. Further, a member of the board also recommended that Menzalopoulos should consider bringing the matter to the attention of the RCMP. Next up. Oh, that's sorry. Next up. Romano then discussed, this is from a little bit later, the preceding section reads, on January 2nd, 2025, Menzalopoulos talked to Romano. Romano said the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions, Dan Williams, was very concerned about AHS internal investigations, the forensic audit, including the investigation of our good friend JP, JP being a reference to Prasad. Romano said that Minister Williams was concerned that the investigation could lead to potential connections between various government officials and Sam Mraiche and MHCare Medical around AHS procurement issues. Romano told Menzalopoulos that his minister was freaked out about any potential connectivity or any exposure that there may be directly or indirectly to government through AHS. Romano then discussed the development of recovery communities and the political involvement and direction around that part of the healthcare refocusing. So again, we're talking about recovery communities. Romano told Menzalopoulos, and this is a quote. This whole thing is a quote. There's essentially now, I assume it's the minister who's hearing from his constituents, but he's freaked out because the connections with the Métis Nation of Alberta, the builder that they've got building the recovery community with MNA, is the same builder with three others. And it's connected to Sam as well. And with this Aaron Barner, who's with the Métis Nation, who's in the pictures at the Oilers games and stuff. And so this is the thing that freaks me out. I definitely know Marshall was involved on that side, which, then makes me wonder about his integrity or standing on anything else. If I know he thought that it was almost his idea. Oh my God. So it does potentially point over. In reply to paragraph 2 of LaGrange's statement of defense, the investigations and external audit commenced by AHS, but then shut down by LaGrange and her officials, have now resulted in at least 6 ongoing investigations by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the Auditor General, the Alberta Auditor General, Treasury Board and Finance, retired Manitoba Judge Wyant, at an apparent initial cost of $500,000 to the Alberta tax, $500,000 to the Alberta taxpayer, and who was appointed by the Premier, who will be overseen by another cabinet minister who sits with LaGrange in the Premier and cabinet and who has not been given any independent authority to compel evidence or records as part of an investigation, the Office of the Ethics Commissioner, and an evidently renewed internal investigation by AHS itself. In respect to any of the other false narratives and unfounded allegations in the statement of defense. In reply to paragraph 29 of the LaGrange defense, Menzilopoulos does not use the word twat, but understands that a complaint was submitted in 2024 regarding former Deputy Minister Tremblay's use of a similar but more derogatory term in respect of a female employed by the government, and she assumes that whoever provided information for the LaGrange defense must have misunderstood the information they received around that allegation in respect of Menzilopoulos. So the use of the bad word, that this statement of defense says that it wasn't Menzilopoulos who said it. It was actually Andre Tremblay. Do with that what you will. Menzilopoulos also denies that she verbally berated as of yet to be named assistant deputy minister, and she was never advised of any such incident. In reply to paragraph 54 of the LaGrange defense that indicates Prasad was being considered for a role in PSOS, that's procurement services, on December 6, 2023, before her start date as CEO. Menzilopoulos was provided with a PowerPoint presentation that confirmed that Alberta Health had, in fact, hired Prasad as its managing director of procurement and system optimization secretariat, PSOS, as of December 4th, 2023. Further, and in respect to the allegations on paragraph 45D of the LaGrange defense, Prasad was employed by Alberta Health on October 18th, 2024, when LaGrange issued the October 2024 directive and took over all Chartered Surgical Facilities, CSF, negotiations, including the renewal contract for ASG, and then set specific rates for CSFs that AHS later determined were in excess of the most recently negotiated AHS rates for other CSFs. Menzilopoulos understands that Prasad helped draft the October 2024 directive and helped establish the rates for CSFs. We're almost at the end. Still further, the government, including LaGrange, was aware of serious concerns around Prasad in late October 2024. Specifically, on October 30th, 2024, Assistant Deputy Minister of Health Darren Headley, ADM Headley, texted Menzilopoulos after Prasad had prepared the false and misleading response to the media inquiry about AHS contracts with MH Care and Sam Mraiche. In his texts, ADM Headley asked Menzilopoulos, would we be able to quietly get it set up to put JP on leave and shut down his access? I'll have to do the same on our side, and quote, confirming with Nicole as she is trying to connect with Rob, end quote. Nicole being, in brackets, Nicole being Nicole Williams, Chief of Staff for LaGrange, and Rob being Rob Anderson, Chief of Staff for Premier Smith. And, quote, we're terminating JP's IT access to Alberta Health tonight as well. I will meet with him in the morning to let him know we're putting him on administrative leave, end quote. The text messages from ADM Headley indicated to Menzilopoulos that both LaGrange and likely also Premier Smith were aware via their respective chiefs of staff of concerns around Prasad. At a minimum, they seemingly knew about the false and misleading media response that Prasad had drafted, indicating that AHS did not have contracts with MH Care, and that triggered the resulting administrative leave for Prasad. Last slide, I promise. The references in the LaGrange defense at paragraphs 40 and 41 to an interim report are deliberately misleading. The interim report being quoted was a preliminary finding, and it related to the initial concerns over the ASG, Alberta Surgical Group, contract that developed in late August 2024, and which contract predated Menzilopoulos' hiring by AHS. However, the interim report did not and could not at the time address issues that developed shortly thereafter involving Prasad, MH Care, and the expanding and serious concerns about the South and Central CSFs and possibly also ASG. In any event, on October 18th, 2024, LaGrange issued the October 2024 directive and assumed control of the ASG and other CSF contracts and took control of AHS procurement regarding the CSF contracts. Which brings us to, I know, such a long show tonight, this piece. And this piece is big and significant. And I want to talk about it for a sec, because we are hearing lots of media reports from journalists about the many figures involved in the corrupt care scandal. Over the last week, we have seen Pete Guthrie table documents in the legislature that seem to, one a reasonable person could interpret as indicating that there were even bigger deals going on with the construction of the forced care prisons, treatment facilities. There's a lot of money, taxpayers' money, your money, that we're talking about here. And there's a lot of different versions of that story. And it has gotten so big that Albertans absolutely deserve to know what the truth is. Again, in reading the government statement of defense last week, in reading Athana's statement of defenses or statement of claim, and then the response to the government's, it gets so meta. There's a lot of contradictory claims that are being made. And it's very, very difficult for Albertans to know what's the actual truth. What's the actual story here? And the easiest, the straightest line to getting to those answers would be for Danielle Smith to invoke, under the Inquiries Act, a public judicial inquiry that would have all of the power of subpoena, all of the power to compel witnesses, all of the power to get to the truth in a public and transparent way. And Danielle Smith and the UCP have tied themselves into pretzels to avoid doing that. Referring back to what I just read, there are 6 investigations that are ongoing into this thing. Most of them, the details will be behind closed doors. If the RCMP finds something that they believe is actually criminal, they may recommend that charges be pressed. And ideally, those charges would get laid. But we now find ourselves in the unusual situation where the Justice Minister, who oversees all of that, now has direct connections, close family connections, close connections and family connections, to be clear, to one of the principals in this whole story. Danielle Smith continues to refuse to call for that independent judicial inquiry under the Inquiries Act. And this leaves Albertans in a very bizarre place, because as it stands right now, the only way that Albertans are going to get a public and real accounting, a hearing of both stories, to a place where people like me don't have to say repeatedly, all of these things have not been tested in court, allegedly, 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 allegedly. The only way that we're going to get through that is if Athana Manzalopoulos' court case goes forward. But the government doesn't have any problems using all of the taxpayer dollars to hire not one, but 2 huge law firms to financially exhaust Athana Manzalopoulos. And here's the thing. She was fired without cause. It's not unrealistic to assume that if she was fired without cause, she would have gotten some sort of severance and been asked to sign an NDA. It's very, very clear from these lawsuits, those 2 things didn't happen, presumably. And if that's the case, it's very, very easy for the social media pundits to go, "Oh, she made all of this money. She should be fine." But let me tell you, you can burn through $30,000 in a week of legal injunctions. Speaking maybe from some personal experience, I don't know. And so a grassroots group of Albertans has come together to start a GoFundMe for her. And I want to make some things clear, and then I'm going to play another long clip that is really, really important because I think it speaks to the validity of this GoFundMe. The first thing is, according to the organizers, Athena Menzalopoulos is aware of the GoFundMe. All of the money is going into her legal trust with her lawyer. Any money left over will be donated not in her name. So she's doing everything right, it sounds like. And it's really, really important that she gets the support that she needs in order for Albertans to get the truth that we deserve. But I'm going to let Dr. Paul Parks speak to that.
I'm Dr. Paul Parks. I'm an emergency physician down in Medicine Hat, and just to be very clear, I'm speaking here. The opinions are my own, so I'm not speaking on behalf of any organization. But I definitely am speaking and advocating in support of this cause to support the GoFundMe that's being announced here today. So just a couple of comments. The wrongful dismissal lawsuit brought forward by Athena Menzalopoulos against the Alberta government is not just a private employment dispute. It's important to know that it directly relates to the fundamental principles of transparency, fairness, and due process. Ensuring this legal case proceeds is not simply about an outcome for one person. It's about protecting the ability to speak truth to power and to defend the public's right to know critical concerns involving our healthcare system. Ms. Menzalopoulos has alleged serious wrongdoing, that political interference and corruption within the Alberta government are actively undermining the healthcare system, putting lives at risk by making it harder for Albertans to access the care that they need in a timely fashion. These are allegations that every Albertan should care about. They demand a full, transparent airing, not legal gamemanship designed to bury them. Yet instead of allowing the facts to come to light, the Alberta government appears to be using taxpayer money to wage a war of attrition against Ms. Menzalopoulos. The overt plan is to hire multiple legal firms and to drag out the legal process. Government intends to wear down her smaller legal team, consume its resources, and to prevent critical information from becoming public. This is not justice, and it is not fairness, and it actually strikes as an abuse of power that will undermine some of the democratic processes and accountability within our legal system. Transparency is not optional in matters that affect the health of safety of millions. Albertans have the right to know whether political decisions are compromising their healthcare. They deserve answers and not obstruction. Shielding government misconduct behind closed doors only deepens public mistrust and jeopardizes confidence in the institutions meant to protect the well-being of every Albertan. Fairness demands that individuals like Athena, who are willing to stand up and speak out, are given a real chance to have their cases heard. When government uses public funds and institutional power to silence whistleblowers and dissenters, they send a dangerous message that truth can be outspent, outlasted, and suppressed. The facts must be examined openly, impartially, and fully. Attempts to suffocate the legal process through delay and exhaustion only confirm the worst fears about government accountability. When corruption and political interference infect our healthcare system, the consequences are not measured just in lost dollars, but also unfortunately, in lost lives. Athena Menzalopoulos is fighting not only for her own rights, but for the opportunity for Albertans to learn the truth about the grave concerns she has raised. The Premier continues to refuse to hold a public inquiry and seems intent on minimizing any chance that the public will ever get any answers. It is in the interest of Albertans to ensure that this case is fought fairly, that the truth can come to light, and that transparency and due process are not hollow promises, but real protections for everybody. So with that, I'll conclude my statement just providing personal full support that we need to be basically all of us be aware of this and support this effort so that the truth can come out.
Now, Dr. Paul Parks those remarks came from the launch of the GoFundMe. And he was not the only person who spoke at that launch. There were a lot of heavy hitters there. Dr. Joe Vipond spoke. Dr. Vipond has a long history of an adversarial relationship with the UCP, and he knows all too well how the government boot can be brought down. Dr. Esther Tailfeathers spoke in support of the GoFundMe. For anybody who's unfamiliar, Dr. Esther Tailfeathers is one of the physicians who founded a treatment model, a treatment space for Indigenous informed, First Nations informed care, especially for people navigating addictions and mental health issues. That was the program that former Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Dina Henshaw, was supposed to be hired into, and Danielle Smith reached down directly and had her fired. I'm just going to pause on that for a second. Dr. Esther Tailfeathers put her full support behind the GoFundMe. And it's important to realize that when we're talking about people like Dr. Esther Tailfeathers, she quit in the wake of that. She left, and she's now doing her own thing for Indigenous and First Nations healthcare. I'm hoping that we're going to be able to get her on the show later in the coming weeks for a conversation about that, because she's amazing. But she's somebody of conviction. She's somebody with a track record that speaks to integrity. And she's put her support behind this as well. Thomas Lukasik, former deputy premier for the province of Alberta, minister of 30 or 40 different ministries during his time in public office, he threw his support behind the GoFundMe. There's a lot of people who are putting their support behind this GoFundMe. And I know it might seem a little dissonant, is probably not the right word. Greedy is probably the one that comes to my mind. For me to now ask my audience, who provided unbelievable and continues to provide unbelievable support for me as I go through my own lawsuit where I'm being sued by Sam Mraiche for $6 million, it probably seems a little bit weird for me to come back and be, but please let me have some more. But if you believe in truth, if you believe that the details of this whole situation deserve to be tested in a court of law, and that's the reality. The versions of events are so different that Albertans don't know what the reality is right now. If you believe in those things and you have the means to support it, I would humbly ask that you consider throwing some support behind this GoFundMe. Because it's the path that we have. It's the only one that Danielle Smith has left available for us. And as somebody who has learned about my alleged almost firing, yeah, I do feel somewhat indebted to Athena Menzalopoulos, because according to her statement of claim, the Premier's office tried to have me fired from my job as a paramedic. And she didn't. She didn't know me. She probably didn't know anything about me. But she had the stones to do the right thing. And that's important, especially with a government that refuses to let Albertans know the truth, refuses to let Albertans know what the reality is. And there's a lot of anxiety in the province right now. Everybody knows we're doing the show and we're like, I don't know, 18 hours or something away from Danielle Smith's big address to the province, the big mystery address on Monday at 3 p.m. She's going to deliver her live address on the province's path forward with the federal government, following a special meeting with the Alberta Government Caucus. Nobody knows what this is going to be. We're going to find out. But even then, whatever Danielle Smith says, are we going to be able to believe it? And the answer to that is probably it'll be possible for some, it'll be hard for many, and it will be impossible for others. And this comes down to the problem with Danielle Smith. This is her in Red Deer.
My question is there a way that we can stop transfer payments to Quebec if they do not let that pipeline through?
Well, I'm thinking of taking a page from what Quebec has proposed. So if you can believe it, we did our Fair Deal panel. We put forward our Sovereignty Act. Well, I discovered about 6 months ago that Quebec copied us, and they did their own Fair Deal panel. And one of the things that they want to do is to adopt a Sovereignty Act, very similar to what Alberta has, which I thought was interesting. But the other thing that they want to do is they want to collect all of the taxes in their own province and then remit to Ottawa their share of what should be paid for federal services. So that sounds like a pretty good referendum question for Albertans about whether we ought to do the same. But really, that I think was fundamentally one of the errors that we made when we were constituting the country when income tax came in. We were given the idea that the federal government would be able to get some efficiencies by collecting all the tax for us. And so they kept on collecting and collecting and collecting and over-collecting. And then rather than rebate back to the provinces or reduce their taxes because they didn't need the money, they just kept on taking it and transferring it. And that's the situation we have right now. So I just want you to know that every single time the federal government proposes a new national program, they know why they're doing that, because it allows them to extract more dollars from Alberta and return less to us than our proper share, so that they can siphon off the rest to subsidize programs in the rest of Canada. They know that that is the racket. So having a foundationally different approach to how we collect taxes is important. I met recently with Austria. So Austria is part of the European Union, and I know that there's troubles in the European Union. I'm not saying that's the system that we want, but they're about the same size as we are. And they have that same kind of approach. They collect the taxes, and then they remit to the European Union their share for the services that are provided. And I want you to give you an idea of how different the amount is. We give about $50 billion to Ottawa in all the taxes that they collect. They give back to us about $25 billion in services. So it's a net transfer of $25 billion. Austria sends about $3 billion to their central government, and they're about the same size as we are. So that gives you some indication of just how out of whack and out of balance the taxation power is. Now, I don't know if we'll be successful on that one, but I think if we and Quebec can work in tandem on something like that, we may be able to address some of those issues once and for all. But we've got to have that conversation.
There's a couple things that I want to talk about before we wrap up tonight's show. And that has to do with populism. There's an expression that populists love to throw around. Vox populi, vox dei. The voice of the people is the voice of God. That was a very deep cut West Wing joke. But vox populi, vox dei is the idea that the people in a democracy can't be wrong. The will of the people can't be wrong. And it's not true. It can be, but it's not. I opened up the show by talking about the fact that the foundation of any healthy democracy is a well-informed electorate. People have to know the truth, and they have to have a shared reality. And we do not have that in the province of Alberta right now. And we don't have it for a long list of reasons. But one of the biggest ones is Danielle Smith gets up and she just makes shit up. She gets shit wrong, and she manufactures this reality for rooms full of people who believe her because she's the premier of Alberta. And why would she lie to them? She answered a question about how do we withhold transfer payments to Quebec, which come from the federal government, for the record, not from the province of Alberta. She answered a question about how do we withhold transfer payments from Quebec by saying, oh, we got to team up with Quebec is what we need to do. And people clapped. She said that, oh, well, you see, we got sold a bad deal when we confederated the country. Canada came to be as an entity in 1867 through the British North America Act. Income taxes weren't introduced in Canada until 1917, and they weren't introduced in order to get shared services. They were introduced in order to make sure that we could pay for the supplies that we needed to fight World War I. Danielle Smith is an economist by education. And here she is telling a room of people unmitigated bullshit. She's just lying to them because it'll make them happy. People can't make good decisions based on lies. The way that she tries to compare Austria and the relationship of Austria to the EU with Alberta and the relationship of Alberta to Ottawa is insane. Austria is its own country. It has joined a consortium of countries for economic gain. That's the EU. Austria has its own laws. It has its own legal system. It has its own healthcare system. All of the countries that are part of the EU do that. The biggest benefits of the EU are you can travel freely within it, and it costs a lot less to move things between countries, member countries of the EU. It's kind of like NAFTA, but with research. That's what the EU is. So to try to compare the amount of money that Austria gives to the EU to the amount of money that Albertans pay in income tax is ludicrous. It's absolutely ludicrous. But she'll say it to people and they'll listen. And this is why populism cannot work. Danielle Smith can sell. She can preach the purest form of democracy. Oh, it's the good stuff. She can do that as much as she wants, but it's a lie because an uninformed electorate cannot make informed decisions. And when one of the biggest propagators of bullshit happens to be the premier of the province, we've got ourselves a very real problem. And we're seeing it already. We're seeing people who have no knowledge, and that's not their fault. Not knowing a thing doesn't make you a bad person, but it does mean maybe you should take a few minutes to do some reading before you start spouting off. We had somebody in the breakdowns comment section today who was trying to tell us that transfer payments from Alberta to Quebec needed to stop, and it's not a thing. Albertans have historically paid more into the federal coffers because Albertans have historically made more than everybody else in Canada. And to say that Albertans shouldn't have to pay their fair share of income tax because they make more is literally making the argument that wealthier people should have to pay less taxes than people who aren't as wealthy. And it's insane. And this is what we're going to use as the foundation for a referendum on separation. The idea behind populism is that if the people are informed, they can make good decisions. The responsibility of any leader of any community is to make sure that they're doing everything that they can to make sure that the people have the information they need to make those decisions. We have a premier who talks about chemtrails. We have a premier who says that everything up to stage 4 cancer is under your control entirely. We have a premier who doesn't know when income tax was brought in the country of Canada or why it was brought in. We have a premier who doesn't understand the difference in relationships between nations and provinces and their own country. The long list of things that Danielle Smith has said in order to rile up her base. It's a long list. But that's the reality. And it's horrifying. And the only thing that is more dissonant is the response. I had a conversation with a journalist a little while ago where we talked about the decline of society. And one of the things that journalist said was, they try to make you laugh as it all burns. When the people who are in power are trying to make you laugh as it all burns, they're trying to minimize it. That's when you know that you're losing. Now, I would make the argument, and I did in that conversation, that there are times where you need to use a little bit of humor. Thank you, AI. Not a real picture of Danielle Smith. There are times when you have to use humor in order to make the truth digestible. But to make a mockery of it is a different thing entirely. And these are very serious times that we're facing. And we need very serious people to show up. What do we get?
It's day one of convention, probably the largest convention we've ever had. People are streaming in, and I realized that I just put on whatever this morning, so I guess this is my day one fit. But there's a lot of swag. I got some cool socks, and I don't know who's gonna buy that.
We are at the New Democrat Convention, and today my fit check is by Courtney Anderson, the designer, and little auntie Bella Callahan.
And I picked up a little bit of NDP swag. Okay, look, check out this color. And
now.
And who are you wearing?
I'm wearing this fabulous t-shirt by the Alberta NDP design team.
Hi friends, I'm Kathleen Genley, and I am incredibly excited to be at the Alberta NDP convention this weekend. I got my sneakers on so I can run around and say hi to all of you. Hope to see you soon.
Are you fucking kidding me? Are you fucking kidding me? That's what we have stepping up to the plate right now. I would love to know who designed the comms strategy that had the leader of the NDP, that the opposition likes to refer to as the premier in waiting, point to a t-shirt with his name on it and say, I don't know who's gonna buy that. And then record it and then post it on social media. I mean, no disrespect to Naheed Nenshi. He's a very, very smart man. But this is the recording that gets put up. If you don't think that the UCP aren't going to clip that and make sure that everybody and their dog knows, not even Naheed Nenshi knows who's going to buy that, I will acknowledge I do not know that much about fit checks. My fit checks, if I'm understanding the term correctly, which it might not be, my fit checks consist of which t-shirt is best going to represent tonight's rant. That's my fit check. I'm not wearing running shoes. I'm wearing very fluffy, comfortable slippers at the moment because I can. That's my fit check. But I can't imagine that the demographic, the audience that is into fit checks on Instagram is going to go, oh, you know what's going to sway me on the NDP? It's not the fact that Danielle Smith is actively trying to destroy the province of Alberta and is fueling fires and making suggestions about referendum questions, but gosh, we could never presuppose what those are going to be. But it's the NDP. Look, they're having fun. They're wearing their running shoes. I find myself wondering if that's who the journalist that I was speaking to was talking about, or if that's what the journalist that I was speaking to was talking about. We have so many crises in the province of Alberta right now. We have so much misinformation and disinformation that is going on right now. And we need to know that there are serious people who are stepping up to the plate, who recognize the severity of the situation that we're in. For the life of me, I cannot begin to wrap my head around who would allow Naheed Nenshi to point at a picture of his own name and say, I don't know who's going to buy that. I get having fun. That's fine. But if you want to have fun, if you want to do jokes, he said cautiously, although I'm not sure the what happened there was jokes. I'd like to think so. But I'm not sure. Then you should be in a business where you can do jokes. We had a federal election just recently where the youth made it clear they're terrified. They don't know if they're ever going to be able to buy a home. They don't know if they're ever going to be financially independent. They don't know what their future looks like. They're not going to be swayed by running shoes and fit checks. They're scared, and they want to know the people, serious people, are going to be there to address their serious problems. And if we don't get there, if we don't get that done, I don't know who's going to buy that either. And that's our show. I got a couple of housekeeping things, a couple of small housekeeping announcements that I want to make. I know. I mean, look at this. It's 10:22. It's 2.5 hours of this. That is too much. I'm aware of that. And I would love. I miss the open mics. I miss the conversation that we had there. So we're going to start doing something new for the next little bit. We're going to be doing on alternating weeks on Wednesdays. We're going to do a special open mic. We'll do it at 8:00 probably. I don't know. We'll figure it out. But we're going to do it on Wednesdays, and we're going to have. If you want to come in and you want to talk, we're going to have the Twitter Spaces open if it's operational, and if it's not, we're going to come up with a better plan because it apparently crashed tonight. But I want to get that dialogue going again. I love the community that we have in the chat, but I miss talking to you in the shows. So we're going to make a special place for that. That's going to be every second Wednesday. We're going to try to do the first one this Wednesday, so keep an eye out for the announcement there. Yeah. Go to the savethana.com website if you can. It's a really good thing. And if you don't want to do that, then you can always find all of the different ways to support us. I'll do the Patreon plugs, but I'm going to leave with the video because I think we all need a laugh after that. If you appreciate the kind of content that we're trying to produce here at The Breakdown, then we'd love nothing more that if you signed up to be one of our Patreon sponsors at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab. You can set the amount that you want to contribute on a monthly basis, and that would be delightful. That's how we pay for the FOIPs. That's how we get to the fun Western Standard reveals and stuff like that. We have some FOIPs pending that are very spicy, and we need your help. So if you're comfortable with that, great. If not, then you can always, we do have the ability to do e-transfers now. So you can sign up or send us an e-transfer at info@thebreakdownab.ca. If you're listening to the audio version of the podcast, do the rating and the review and the stars and all that. If you're watching, if you've made it this far, I hope you took a couple breaks. I really sincerely hope you did. But if you made it this far and you're watching on the YouTubes, the likes, the subscribes, the little bell. We have a wonderful person who makes shorts out of the episodes, so you don't have to sit through 2.5 hours of this, and you'll get little notifications when those things come up. So that's cool too. And that's about what I've got for tonight. So to leave things on a positive, a funny note. It's a funny note. We're going with the video.
How's your BS detector evolved over time?
I tend to be pretty trusting.
You would think, like, how many years? 2 years now? That would get old. And yet, here I am, enjoying it as much as I do. I want to say thank you to everybody. I want to say thank you to everybody who's been in the chat, and all of that. Thank you so much. Looking forward to Wednesday, where we're just going to open mic it. And then we're going to, there's rumors we might be getting, maybe some other people tapping in, and we'll just have silly conversations about none of this stuff for an hour or so. That's what I got. Thank you all so much. Who knows what Daniel Smith is going to do tomorrow? God help us all. Let's cross our fingers. Maybe it is like we're going to get pipelines or chocolate. I don't know. But we'll be there for it, and we'll be looking forward to chatting about it on Wednesday, I guess. In the meantime, in between time, take care of yourselves, and as always, keep the conversation going.